everyone, welcome to the first official book review, kinda, on this channel. As the title suggests, this is the start of my Cosmere journey. Now, some of you might be saying, what the fuck is the Cosmere? The Cosmere is Brandon Sandersons' magnum opus. The Cosmere is a set of books in the same solar system, in the same universe. Basically, some of the books are in different planets, but they have similar magic structures that are referenced to each other. Also, some characters hop between worlds and stuff like that. So that's essentially what the Cosmere is. And Brandon Sanderson is like a huge fantasy guy. He's like up there in popularity with Tolkien and George R.R. Martin. He's like the modern age version of them in accordance to popularity. And I had only read the first Mistborn book and The Way of Kings. But now on this journey, I am going to read every single Cosmere novel. And hopefully by December, I will get to The Winds of Truth, which is the latest and also last Stormlight Archive book, and the newest Cosmere book. But Brandon Sanderson likes to write a lot, so he's probably going to write like 3 or 4 more books in just the year 2025. So my schedule is going to have to change. But every month, I'll throw up a little graph here. I'm going to read a certain amount of Brandon Sanderson books. I'll also be reading some other books, which I will do separate reviews for. But Cosmere is going to be my main focus of this year in reading everything. And the place where everyone tells you to start is Mistborn Era 1, aka the original Mistborn trilogy. I've had these paperbacks for a long time, and now I have finally finished the trilogy. And this review is going to be split into 2 parts. Spoiler free, which, welcome. And then spoiler filled, which I will put up a warning screen and also time codes in the description below. So let's get into Mistborn. So what is Mistborn about? Basically, think of the Chosen One, right? The Chosen One saved the day. But what if he turned into an evil Dark Lord at the end of that? What if the Hero of Ages turned into the Lord Ruler and he took over the world and enslaved a certain population called the Ska? That's basically what Mistborn is. Mistborn is like the ultimate underdog story. The underdogs are trying to take on the nobles, essentially, and the top of the nobles is the Lord Ruler. Where do we begin with Mistborn? Let's talk about the magic system a little bit. So the magic system basically is, some people are called mistlings and some people are called Mistborn. Mistlings specialize in one certain metal. Now, what does that mean? Certain metals give you certain abilities. For example, one metal, which I don't remember the names of them, so I'll put them behind me. One of the metals can influence people's emotions. So say you want to make someone really angry. You would pull at their emotions. Well, when you consume the metal, you would pull at their emotions, and then you could get them angry, you could make them sad, you could make them happy, you could make them calmer, which is what is used a lot for like negotiations. An allomancer will, or a misting will do that to calm someone down, or heighten their emotions to get a point across, especially in crowds and stuff like that. And then you have the, what I like to call the Spider-Man magic powers, which is push and pull. Basically, some Mistborn and Mistlings can throw a coin, and then you push yourself off that coin, and then pull yourself forward using the other Allomancer magic. So basically, you flip a coin, push off it, you fly in the air, and then you can pull on another metal, and it's almost like you're swinging around. I'll show an animatic in the background with the person who made the animatics, just so you can kind of visualize what I'm saying, because I don't think I'm explaining it properly. But who does explain it properly is Brandon Sanderson. If you can say anything about Brandon Sanderson in his writing, he knows how to explain magic systems perfectly, so you can visualize it in your head. He is a master at that. He's not too prosy, so he's not very flowery with his language, but he gets the point across. His writing is not hard to follow at all, which is great, especially for people who maybe read like Percy Jackson books or YA fantasy books and want to get into like adult fantasy. Brandon Sanderson is a perfect jumping off point. It's not like The Black Company or like Malazan, where like they just put you right into the world and you're like, what? Brandon Sanderson drip feeds you information that you need, and he's really good at it. I would compare it, if I could compare it to an anime with the type of informational reveals, I would compare it to something on Attack on Titan, where one thing is answered, but then out of that answer, 2 more questions pop up. And even at the end of this trilogy, there are more questions. You get a lot of answers at the end, and it's satisfying as a trilogy, but you also get a lot of questions as well, which is what I like. I like to keep the mystery going. He takes like the J.J. Abrams like mystery box approach, but actually does like a really good job with it. So the magic system is incredibly well. The writing is really good. The dialogue is good as well. I really like it. I really like how when someone says a statement, it's like, well, how do we go about doing this in a plan? And 5 more questions are answered. Like 5 questions you would say as a reader, like, wait, if they do this, then what about this and this and this? And a character right after a statement will be like, hey, what about this and this and this? It's like, oh, you almost read my mind there, Sanderson. So Sanderson has like everything planned out. At least that's the way it's coming off from Era 1. The characters are really, really compelling, really good. Vin starts out as kind of your generic like female protagonist where she's like, I'm a girl, but I lived in the tough streets and I have a certain edge to myself. But as the books progress further and further, she has a lot more depth to her. And even within the first book, she gets over that like angsty phase pretty quickly. So to the point where it's not annoying anymore. I will say within these books, there are a couple issues that I will get into the spoiler one. I will say one of them is repetitiveness. So at a certain point in the plot of the first Mistborn book, it's Vin going to these galleries, to these balls and stuff like that. And it's kind of like some of those instances don't progress the plot. It just seems kind of filler. But it's character development, so I'm less reluctant to call it filler, but it still is like, oh my god, we're at a ball again, you know. But it makes up for it for the ending. If Sanderson knows how to do one thing in these books, is the last 200 to 100 pages, his fans call it the Sanderson slope, I believe, which is like everything just comes crumbling apart and like you can't stop reading the book because you need to know how it ends. Sanderson is very, very good at that. He's a little slow with build up. I will say the first Mistborn suffers from every first fantasy book. Every first fantasy book has to establish the world, and that can be very hard to do because out of like all the rest of the books, first one is always kind of the weakest because it's busy setting everything up, and Mistborn is very much of that too. But I feel like it does a very good job. You know, you just have to do it within the first fantasy novel. You have to explain the magic system, you have to explain the world, and the second and third book, as the series progresses, then it's like, okay, you already know these concepts, we can get into more meat and potatoes. So Kelsier is also a huge role in this book. He's one of the standout Sanderson characters. People seem to really, really love Kelsier. I also like Kelsier, but he is very flawed. But Brandon Sanderson knows he's flawed, and he wants to tell you how flawed he is because some of the characters are questioning Kelsier's move. So the plot of the story is basically Kelsier gets this group, including Vin, which is Kelsier and Vin are kind of both our main protagonists. So Kelsier brings Vin in because she's a Mistborn. What is a Mistborn? So instead of focusing on one power that metals can have, they can use all the powers. Mistborn can use all the powers of different metals. So they can also do the Spider-Man swinging thing, and they can also manipulate people's emotions, along with other things like heightened sense and stuff like that. Vin and Kelsier are Mistborns, and basically his plan is to rob the Lord Ruler of all his ATM, which is like what gives them those powers and stuff, those metals. And also, Kelsier plans to kill the Lord Ruler, which is almost unheard of because I believe the Lord Ruler has taken over for about 1,000 years, if I'm not mistaken. And people have tried, it's not going to work out. And Kelsier wants to free the Ska, which are like basically the slaves of this world. Vin, in fact, is one of the Skas. But she's more of a street urchin. She wasn't like sold to a master or whatever. She just like lives off the street and stuff like that. And that's their plan. And then the whole book is about how they execute that plan, how they go about that plan. And again, I won't spoil the ending because this is a spoiler-free thing. But if you want to get into fantasy, the Mistborn trilogy is perfect. The other 2 books just elaborate more without spoiling anything. The second one is like how to... I can't even say that because it'll spoil. That's the hard thing with talking spoiler-free about 2 books that are further on into the series. But they further the characters, the plot furthers along, and more questions are answered. So if you're into that kind of stuff, like a Attack on Titan type drip feeding plot that's really, really engaging, especially toward the end of the book, you're not going to want to put it down. Slow starts at the beginning, but great endings and pretty good middle parts. So yeah, the Mistborn trilogy, and if you like this, you can go off into the Cosmere, or if you just care about Mistborn, you don't want to read the Stormlight archives because those are 1,000+ pages. Some people ain't got the time for that. You can move on to Mistborn Era 2. You know, if you just want to stick with Mistborn, they're pretty decently sized books. You can go on ahead and do that. However you want, if you want the whole Cosmere experience, you're gonna have to read Stormlight and other stuff. There are plenty of reading guides out there. I'll link some below that I have used for my month-to-month reading thing that I'm going to do. All right, so now this is the end of the spoiler free. We're going to get into spoilers. I'm going to talk about each of these books briefly and what I liked about them. So here we go. Spoilers. So the first Mistborn book, I was shocked that Kelsier was killed off. And when he was killed off by the Lord Ruler, I was like, surely he's going to come back. And he doesn't throughout the whole trilogy. Even in the second book, Well of Ascension, when Finn sees that mysterious figure that's Eldon's brother, I thought, oh, that's Kelsier. Okay, so that didn't take long. But no, it's a completely different character. Kelsier's death is so significant, and I love how everything within this trilogy is foreshadowed. It's so apparent. Like when Say said, it's like, oh, here's this religion where they really worshipped their god because they died for their sins. And then Kelsier's like, I guess I gotta go do that. I guess I'm gonna go do that. Kelsier is a compelling character, but like what I said earlier, he does have flaws in which he's like merciless with the nobles. He's just like, oh, well, they're nobles, they're complicit, so I'll just kill them. And I like how the crew has brought that up. Like, Kelsier was kind of like a little unhinged. Like, even for us, I mean, we're part of the crew, we love him. He's unhinged, and I love that aspect of Brandon Sanderson. It just doesn't leave like, I'm gonna kill nobles, and everyone's like, yeah, that's pretty cool. It's like, Kel, like, you're going a little bit too far. I like Breeze. Breeze is a very great character, brings a lot of levity and stuff like that. Say said it's probably one of my favorite characters in the entire trilogy. I love his whole arc. And then even at the end with Heroes of Ages, like, Spook gets like a little bit of an arc, which I was not expecting because he was always a background character, but then he gets time to shine, which was really, really cool to see. Yeah, so the first Mistborn book, and then her killing the Lord Ruler, and it's like, oh, okay, that's great. Like Vin killing the Lord Ruler with the 11th medal, seeing the past version of himself. He's like, wait a minute, you're not the hero of ages. You were his like assistant in a way that hated him. And then him just being like, you have no idea what you've done. And then that all paying off throughout the trilogy because like, even though he was awful, he also had these bunkers where humanity could hide during the end of days, which is like, oh, like you enslaved a bunch of people, but also you like had this system where you could save everyone. Now, toward the end, I think Say says something like, oh, the Lord Ruler was actually good for doing this. And it's like, well, he skimmed over the part where he did enslave the ska. Like, that wasn't so groovy. But besides that overlook, it's just so interesting how everything comes together. This is just me rambling at this point. I'm not going to go through book by book. It's just going to be me rambling about the Mistborn trilogy. Yeah, Kelsier's death is super significant. I kind of know. So I did the jerk thing where I was like, can I read Secret History right after this? Because I heard it takes place directly after, and it's about Kelsier. And then I started reading, and it slowly started to depict another character that's going to be in Era 2, and I can't get into Era 2 till later on in the year. So I'm like, you know what? I'm gonna stop right here. So the only thing I know is that Kelsier is in another plane of existence after his death. That's the only thing I know about Secret History. Besides that, I have no idea what happens after. Vin's character is really interesting because at first she's portrayed as just like, oh, I'm just, a hardened lady warrior kind of thing. But then you realize how smart she is. Even Eldon says how smart she is. The only thing holding her back is she never got a proper education. If she had gotten proper education, she would be on the same level as Eldon, learning-wise and stuff. And Eldon is a great character too. I really love his progression in The Well of Ascension. The Well of Ascension is a lot of like, hey, so he killed the Lord Ruler. What do we do now? And like, Eldon even like tries to create a democracy, and it just does not work because you think, oh yeah, so obviously our society, we're part of a democracy, so obviously that would just work. But in like a medieval setting, it might not work as well. And Eldon gave these people too much power, and they don't want change, so they want to revert back to the way things were. And Eldon slowly having to realize that. And I even got a little scared there because there was a description of him in like black armor. I'm like, oh, is this setting up Eldon as like being another Lord Ruler, like history repeating himself? It didn't quite go that way, but maybe if he didn't have the threat of the end of the world, Eldon might have turned out a completely different character, which I really appreciate. That characterization Well of Ascension. People have complained that in Hero of Ages he doesn't progress as much, but I feel like that's fine. Within like a trilogy, a solid trilogy, I kind of see it as one big story in 3 parts, so if the majority of characterization happens in the second book, and then the third book it's all about conclusion, then I'm perfectly fine with that. It's more so if you space them out, you would notice it a lot more, but I read these back to back, so I didn't really get that. But yeah, Well of Ascension, I will say I don't like how his brother then reveals that, oh, your brother was like an evil Mistborn guy. And he's like, what? I don't have a brother. And that's kind of the end of the story. There's no like drama after that. I get there's a lot of big things, but like it almost seemed pointless. Like I get why, because Eldon's father was like, oh, I raised this brother so that he could take over at some point, or he could be used as a weapon. But like he kind of just, oh, that's my cool, like there's no drama and stuff. And like that stuff, like the Vince stuff really kind of irritated me in the Well of Ascension. It was just like, oh, I should just be with Eldon's brother because he's like, I even forget his name, because he's like just like me, he grew up hard, so I'm compatible. How could me and Eldon ever get along? He's a no, blah, blah, blah. Like it was just like, I get what he was doing, but like Vin's interaction, it just kind of irked me. All the Eldon stuff was really good, but Vin kind of irked me in Well of Ascension until the very end when she gets to control the Koloss and like she just goes on a rampage. Like that was really cool. And then she's past that point. The shapeshifter, that was a cool reveal. I can't remember these characters' names. I'm gonna have these characters' names pop up so people know what I'm talking about who have read the books. Like that was a cool reveal, and then him still helping her, which he's not supposed to do, was really cool. What else? I guess let's just go into Hero of Ages. This is just such a great conclusion. Like I could not stop reading the book. Like I was like literally in the middle of midnight, I was just like, I have to fit. It was like 2 a.m. I'm like, I have to finish it. I also like the foreshadowing with Eldon's brother, where like Ruin was talking to him the whole time, and the Ruin character is like really well set up because the whole thing of the universe is like two opposite. It's kind of like a Full Metal Alchemist magic system where it's like equivalent exchange. Like if something is taken, something must be returned as well. You have Ruin and Ruin and Preservation. That's it. When Vin gets ascended and like she's essentially like preservation or a form of preservation, and she's like, oh, let me try to do something, and then Ruin's just like, fuck that. You can't do that anymore. Was really, really cool. And then I could see why people were upset somewhat with the ending or call it controversial. I liked it. I just saw Brandon Sanderson and I was just like, okay, you're really into Final Fantasy and JRPGs, because every JRPG is essentially, hey, let's go kill God, or hey, let's become God and kill the other God. And I was just like, okay, I'm reading so much Final Fantasy into this. And then like even at the end when Eldon dies, he's just like, you idiot, like your body, we used up all of that alimancy, like, so you can't return Ruin. And then Vin killing Ruin essentially, and then that was so like I cried when Eldon died. I like actual tears. Like this really did move me, and Vin died. I can see where people might have been upset because they didn't get a traditional send off, like, okay everyone, it's time for me to go, I'm going to die. Like I get like Vin doesn't get to say goodbye to Ham, but like earlier, like when it's their last interactions, when you really think about it, it's like that was kind of a proper goodbye. Like even when Vin was alive and Eldon, they have that one final kiss. It's like, oh, somebody's gonna die. I did get spoiled a little bit by Vin dying, but I had no idea Eldon was gonna die. And it really does a great job of like, this truly is the end of the world. And I love Sazed's arc, him going through all the religions and being like, nope. Well, I guess I'm an atheist now. And then he's like, wait a minute. Part of these religions were wrong, but also correct in some areas. And him kind of formulating all that. Now, I've got to get into kind of like a religious talk here. So if you don't care about that, skip ahead. So me, myself, I'm not particularly a religious person. Brandon Sanderson is Mormon, and it does show in his work. I will say, like, some of it is very obvious, but I don't have a problem with it because he's not pushing it as if religion is the end-all be-all. He uses religion in a way where he's like, religion is important to some people, and that's fine, you know? I've seen some people like, oh, like, Sanderson books are just like religious fan fiction, and I'm like, well, if we're gonna go that route, then Dante's Inferno is a fan fiction. Dante going through and like all the poets and stuff being like, you the man, Dante, you're so sick, and it's like, well, that's a literary classic, and literally like no one points out that how that's basically Christian fan fiction, essentially. So, like, but it's still good. It's still a literary classic, and I wouldn't say nothing wrong on Dante's Inferno because it is a classic. It just so happens that the writer is religious, and I feel that same way with Brandon Sanderson. Is like, yes, it is somewhat obvious, but it's not like to the point where like there's like an atheist character and like they're just like, boo, boo, you don't believe in God, boo. Like, it's not that, you know. So I again, I'm not particularly religious, and I still was fine with it. And like, Seisid's character is a really, really good character, and the way he remakes the world, he was like the perfect candidate because throughout his whole character arc, he was like, I'm not going to intervene. I'm not going to intervene with politics, but he constantly does. He's kind of hypocritical in that way. He's like, but here's some advice, here's some advice, here's some advice. I can get some complaints of like, oh, he was like kind of whiny through his atheist arc in the Hero of Ages, but I didn't mind it because that was like really was part of his character's journey, is realizing that his religion was a lie and made up, and then him having the feeling like, well, I have to disprove everything else, even though like he would say that's not what he's doing. It very much was. He was just like on a vengeful path to like disprove everything, but then at the end being like, oh, I get it now. In a way, he was the Hero of Ages. It's like, ah, that's so beautiful and so poetic. And Spook's arc is really good. Him becoming like a Kelsier figure when he was always like an afterthought of the crew, but then becoming really, really important. And even Seisid and Breeze being like, this is not the old Spook. And they see glimpses of him, but they're also like, he's becoming like a more confident person, and that's really good for him. So yeah, those are my thoughts. Those are my spoiler thoughts. Everything I wanted to kind of talk about. It was mostly about Hero of Ages, but with any conclusion, that's what you talk about. I'm excited to see where Secret History goes with Kelsier's journey. Who knows where that leads? I have no idea. Thankfully, I stopped halfway through because, you know, I think you have to read Bantam Morning and then read Secret History. Even though, like, I was so in love with this era, I was like, I need something more. I need more. And that was the only other thing. I'm like, fuck it, I'll just read it. And then I was like, wait, no, I can't read this. So those are my thoughts on the Mistborn trilogy, Era 1. That completes Era 1. So next month, I am going to be reviewing Elantris and Warbreaker and a couple other... Oh, and Emperor's Soul. I will also be reading that. And then a couple other like short stories that tie into those. And then March is where I'll start The Way of Kings. I did Stormlight Archives books their own month. Like, so I'm not reading other books. I'm just like, okay, I have to finish through this book because it's chunky. It's going to take me a while. But yeah, so that's my thoughts on Era 1. So far, Brandon Sanderson has really impressed me. The only things I will say is there's some repetition, like in Well of Ascension, like Vin's like going back and forth between Eldon and his brother, and it's just like, oh my god, Vin, like, Jesus, like, it's just like, but all the Eldon stuff, then you're like, oh, Eldon, like, this is cool. I still really enjoy Vin as a character. She's really, really compelling, and I like how she's the counter to L and stuff like that. Seisid's a solid character. Ham is a great character. He's always asking questions. Yeah, I really enjoyed the characters. I felt really connected to them. The magic system is absolutely fantastic, and just when you think you know everything, you don't know everything. So that's going to be it for this review. Check out my other channel, Black Hudson, where I do more in-depth video essays on anything. This is going to be a booktube channel going forward. I'll still be talking about maybe like comic books and stuff like that, but for the most part, I'm going to be talking about every book I'm reading this year, and especially the Cosmere. So this is my Cosmere journey so far. Really, really good start. I'm really, really liking it. So yeah, thank you guys, and leave a comment below whether you like Mistborn Era 1 is not it, Mistborn Era 2 is way better, or I've also heard like Mistborn Era 2 is too goofy, like you're not gonna like it as much. Like, leave a comment below, just being like, talking about Mistborn, and like try not to spoil aspects of how the Cosmere is connected. I know some connections, but I don't know the complete collections of like everything that happens within the Cosmere. So keep it to Era 1, and if you are going to talk about other Cosmere books, kind of like, don't give spoilery stuff, just give vague, kind of like, oh, you're really going to want to pay attention to Elantris to this section or something like that. Like, that's fine, but don't explain what that section is or something like that. But anyways, that's going to be it for me, guys. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one. See ya. By the way, rating wise, I would give Mistborn like 3 stars. Well of Ascension, I'd give 4 stars, and then Hero of Ages 4.5 stars. But yeah, but overall, trilogy, like 4 stars. Yeah, bye.